relatively short training, I guess we want to call it. I'm just basically laying out the important features of Eagle, making sure you have a good understanding of navigating around an Eagle and knowing what's there, and then open the floor to any questions you might have. And I've got this Eagle guide that we're going to just talk about a little bit. Most of our time will actually be spent on the website at Eagle. So if you want to go ahead and log into Eagle, go ahead. If you don't know how, I will show you how in just a couple minutes. All right, so here we go with Eagle. First of all, you need to know that Eagle is meant to be an online assessment system. It's been around for a really long time. I'm not sure exactly how long. I'm thinking around 12 or 15 years. Maybe not quite that long, but I think it has been around almost that long. And when it first came out, I was pretty amazed. I thought it was one of the best things the State Department of Education had ever provided for us. Still do. I think it's a great tool. There have been some modifications over the years, though, and some good, some that I don't like as much. But we'll talk through some of those things as we go today. You need to know, though, that Eagle is not a place where you can create assessment items. It's a place where assessment items have been added by DRC, or you may know DRC Data Recognition Corporation as eDirect. It's the same company that makes our spring leak tests. It's the same company that creates our interims and diagnostic assessment items. So as far as that goes, we feel good about the alignment of these items to what we're supposed to be teaching, particularly in Algebra 1 and Geometry. But just know that the items in there are the only items that you're able to use within the Eagle platform. You can't edit them. You can't bring in new items as far as I know, unless that feature's recently been added. That said, though, I think there are some pretty good items, and we'll take a look at those items and see what's available to us. To begin with, this user guide, I'm going to skip over to page 10, and actually, even before I do that, notice this says all users, and what that means is all users includes teachers, school administrators, district administrators, and even State Department personnel. So if you're going through this user guide, you kind of have to be aware of the role, because you may, if not, you may be tricked into thinking you have access to do something that you may not. Not a big deal, though. I think those are pretty self-explanatory as you go. So the first thing I want to do is skip to page 10, and we actually want to get onto the website. And so to do that, there's on page 10, it kind of shows you the process for going through that. It actually, these screenshots, I think, are a little outdated. So I'm going to show you the way it goes, but it's basically going to eDirect. And I think most of you have done that. Using getting ready for diagnostics or interims or things like that. If you have not, you should have access to eDirect, which, by the way, eDirect and DRC are kind of interchangeable. In fact, if you'll see in this website right here, it's kind of small, but right here it says DRC eDirect. In this user guide, they typically refer to it as eDirect. However, on the website that we go to here, you see that it's called DRC Insight. So try not to let that confuse you, the difference, the different names of eDirect versus DRC. Those are two names for the same thing. All right, so typically you log in here with your Caddo email address. And I don't know if it would be good for you to go there yourself while you're listening to this, if you're able to. I think we've got a couple people who are tuned in on the phone, so that might be feasible. But if you're sitting at a computer and you want to go here and access it yourself and follow along that way, that would be fine. Or you can just follow along with the screen that I'm going to have and be able to see what's going on and maybe take notes if you'd like. If you don't have your credentials for this, that's not something I can get for you right now. So you could send me an email and I could work on getting that for you maybe by tomorrow. Or someone at your school should have access to this to get your login credentials. So either way, but feel free to contact me if you'd like me to help with that. So I'm going to sign in to my DRC Insight / eDirect account. And notice at the top here, it has My Applications. And some of you, again, are familiar with this by setting up diagnostics and interim assessments and so forth with the state Leap 360 platform. But look over here, the very last choice under Other Links is Eagle 2.0. That's where we want to go. So I went to DRC Insight, I clicked on Applications, and then I clicked on Eagle 2.0. Now, I'm not sure that you will receive this screen when you first log in. For me, for some reason, it's showing last year and this year. I'm guessing that they have last year's platform available. In the old days, you didn't have a year-to-year platform. I don't know if it's because if you had made tests last year that maybe they're not automatically in the 1920 system. I didn't check on that. But for our purposes today, we'll just be looking at 1920. If you used EAGLE last year and you created some assessments, you might have to go back to the 1819 tab. I'm just not sure about that. But here's the home screen for EAGLE. Again, please stop me along the way as we go. I'm not going to follow the order of the user guide. So if you actually have a copy of the user guide, I'm going to be going out of order with that. I'm going to use an order that I think makes a little more sense with regard to a teacher using this in your classroom. Because I know some teachers in Caddo who are using EAGLE already are just finding items to use for bell ringers, exit tickets, classwork in the middle of the lesson, something like that. And so the first place you would go for that is the item bank. The item bank is going to show you everything that's in EAGLE. And before we get too far along, I want to point out the navigation buttons that are embedded in the site. So they don't want you using the navigation buttons on your URL or on your internet provider here, whatever that's called. You want to use the navigation buttons within the platform. Okay, so just be aware of that. But when I clicked on item bank, I get a very basic search page, and I can go by grade level. Let's say we want to pull up 9th grade and mathematics, so pretty broad. And then you have this text identifier focus source page thing tab where you can type some things in. To me, that's a little problematic because unless you're extremely familiar with what's in EAGLE, you may not know really how to type things in. Even if you type in standards, you may type them in a slightly different format than the way EAGLE has them in there. For instance, if I was going to type a standard that ended with the number 1, they may have it as 01. So I tend to avoid this last little search bar here, and instead I go to the Show Advanced filter. And then this may seem a little overwhelming, but it'll really, I think, make your life easier because once I've entered mathematics, then I can go in here and notice they still have Common Core, GLE, and other standards listed here. Louisiana EOC, I didn't even know that was such a thing. But since we are in 2019-20 using Louisiana student standards, which are for the most part the same as Common Core with some minor differences, particularly geometry has some, more differences than other courses. But I would encourage you to tend to use the Louisiana student standards. Then from there, we're going back and picking a domain, I guess, of standards. So I can see here my algebra standards, my function standards, and so forth. So this goes all the way through the high school standards. So if I pick, let's go to, so we'll just start the first one, APR. From there, then I can narrow it down to the clusters of standards. Okay, so I clicked on Louisiana Student Standards. I chose a cluster of standards here. Underneath that, well, I chose a domain, I guess. And then under that, I'm going to choose the A cluster. And then one more, I'm going to pick, there's only one standard under that cluster. So if I had picked, let's see if I had picked the B cluster, there's still only one standard. Okay. Normally, though, you would see, more than one standard there. Then I could pick that standard. Anywhere along the way, I could have hit the search tab. Just as soon as you get it narrowed down. Maybe you wanted to see all the APR standards. You could have stopped right there and clicked search. But I'm going to narrow this down. And so we're just pulling up one standard. And actually, unfortunately, there's only one item for this standard. So that's what you're going to see. And there are a few standards in here that actually don't have any items yet for the particular standard. On the other hand, I pulled up a middle school standard last week that had 59 items for that one standard. So it's going to vary quite a bit. I'm told by the State Department a couple months ago that they are adding items at a furious pace. I don't know what furious pace means, but that's what I was told. And so as you come back to this, hopefully you'll find more and more items throughout the year. So once I get to an item, in fact, I'm going to go back and see if there are more items under this other standard just to show it. So now I went to A1, APR A1, and you can see that there are actually 11 items under that standard. So that makes me feel a little bit better. Once I'm in this screen, I can actually see the little magnifying glass out here. I can preview an item, and it's going to pop up this window for some reason. It's a little redundant, but it's going to tell me to preview again. And this is going to pull it up as the students would see it if they were taking it online. Notice you've got the same tools that they see on our spring leak tests, and those are active. You know, I can click on an answer, although it really doesn't mean anything in here because this item is not tied to any student testing. But if, as I mentioned earlier, if you were wanting to use this as a bell ringer or part of your instruction at any point in time, you could pull this up. And you've got the same tools here. You've got the X out tool that eliminates answers that you don't think are legitimate. If there were a reading passage that was lengthy, you could come in here and highlight portions of that passage. You got sticky notes that they have on the leak test where you could add an instructional comment or something, I guess. Magnifier, line guide. A line guide is just a reading tool for students with accommodations, which you would need on this item. And then typically you have a calculator out here. However, I'm assuming this is a non-calculator question. This would appear on the non-calculator section of the test. And so it's not there. When there is a calculator there, it will pull up the appropriate calculator. For instance, for 8th graders, it would only pull up a scientific calculator. But I believe for Algebra 1 and Geometry, it should pull up the Desmos graphing calculator. So I can look at that item, and again, whether I just want to see it as a teacher to know if it's something I want to use, or if I actually want to put it up in front of my kids on a screen and work with it interactively, then I can do that. And then, you know, this gives them more exposure to the state testing platform, so there's a lot of value in that. Notice when I pulled up the item, it pulled up a separate tab on my internet browser. So I can just delete that tab out, and now I'm back to where I pulled up the search for APR A1. And I can go through and go item by items, you know, standard by standard, item by item, and look and see what items are available. One of the things I started working on in middle school is pulling these items by standard and setting them up as individual tests. So I will continue to work on that, and as I get those available, I'll have those available to you, probably linked in our scope and sequence in PDF format. One catch to that is that if they are continually adding items, then those, you know, I'll need to update those every once in a while. But I just thought this would be a nice resource to have. If you're teaching lessons related to this standard, then you could have these items close by. In the meantime, now you're learning how to go to EAGLE and pull them for yourself. But ultimately, we hope to have these built into our scope and sequence. Okay, so that's the item bank. Again, now, by the way, these passages and images tabs here, I don't know if those are even available to you as teachers. Even if they are, they're not going to give you a lot. They basically, for math, they're just going to give you the text of these problems. And then the images, it'll show you the images that are embedded in these problems. So I don't know where there's a value in that. And again, it may not be available to you at the teacher level. And so I think the only thing you need anyway would be the items here. But I noticed I had the search, and remember that I clicked on Show Advanced Filter, and I was able to break it down by Louisiana student standards, by grade level or domain, and then by clusters of standards, and then individual standards. And remember, anywhere along the way, I could stop and hit search. So for instance, if I hit search right here, and all I've done is LSS, we may be here for a long time. I probably shouldn't have done that. But that should pull up every high school math item. And I think there are more than 275, so that may not be completely correct, but it could be. I'm not sure how many are in here. So we know there are at least 275 high school items, or 9th grade items, I guess, if we're looking at 9th grade, okay? All right, again, please jump in if you have a question or a comment. Also, those of you who've used EAGLE recently and have some suggestions, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to go back to home. Again, remember, I used the navigation buttons within the site and not using my navigation buttons for my web browser. So we looked at item bank. I'm going to go backwards here, and we're going to look at tests. Now, the first thing I want to say about tests is you need to recognize that that word tests is used loosely. You don't necessarily have to consider everything you use on here as a test. It could be, as I mentioned earlier, a bell ringer, an exit ticket, some problem set within your instructional process of the day. It could be something you call a quiz. But when we say test in the context of EAGLE, we're talking about bringing more than one item into a document or to give online to students. So you notice when I clicked on test, I get a similar search thing. What I'm searching for here, though, is tests that I already have created or that have been shared with me. So if you have not used EAGLE, you probably won't have anything here to search for. Over time, we hope to build libraries of assessments in here connected to standards or Springboard lessons, and then share them out with the district so that you'll have access to those. At this point, we don't have those. So you probably don't see anything in here if you've not used EAGLE anytime recently. So that's kind of irrelevant in most of your cases. But what you do want to take note of here is the actions button here in the top right. And then the simple thing is there's only going to be one choice there, and that is to create a new test. So from my home screen, I clicked on tests. And then again, I have some tests listed here that I've created. If you've not created any or had any shared with you, then you probably won't have anything in this list to search for. So we would want to go to Actions and New Test. And then I can name this test. I'm going to say High School Practice. I can give it a description if I want, but that's not a required field. I'm going to say this is mathematics, of course, and I'm going to assign it as a 9th grade assessment. Now, saying it's a 9th grade assessment doesn't limit me to 9th grade items, but it just kind of denotes this test in the search engine that I've designated this as a 9th grade test. In high school, that may be a little less relevant, but you're going to have to enter a grade level there just for the sake of the site. I don't think it'll show up on any printable material if you were to use a printed site. But also notice when I clicked on 9th grade, it automatically allows the high school math reference sheet to students as they go through this test that I'm building, whether I use it as a test or not. So once I have everything in here that I want, again, I could put a description if I'd like, but that's not necessary. Then I would save that information. And now notice what happened here is I've got no test items, and I've got add items, and also add passages, which again, I don't think you're going to need that in anything math related. So if I click add items, this is going to look familiar because here we go back to the item bank search engine that we had a bit ago. And as we said earlier, we would probably click that grade level. We want mathematics. If you want to use this field here, that's okay, but you got to know how EAGLE is set up and so that you know that you're searching properly. If you're one character off, it's not going to give you results. So that's why I like to go to the advanced filter. I would click on Louisiana Student Standards. I'm actually going to go to CED this time. Creating equations, there's only an A cluster. There are 4 standards under the A cluster. So I'm going to pick standard 2, creating equations of 2 or more variables. And I'm going to find those items. And notice there are only 4. But if I'm doing a lesson that pretty much centers around this standard, A, CED, A2, then I might want to pull up all those items. Now what you may not be able to see because it's very small print is this little column here is the item type. And it turns out that all 4 of these items have CR, which I think most of you know what that means, constructed response. Also notice that I can preview the items before choosing them, or I can just check on them and notice a little check mark appears if I click on the item. I'm not sure why it's waiting because it usually doesn't wait here that long. And I could check off 2 or all 4 of those items. I could click select all to make it easier, if indeed I want all of them. I could look at them individually, or I could say done. And now I have this 4-item test. And again, the word test is being used loosely there. So once I've done that, I can go back to my actions and notice I've got several options here that I didn't have before. Before, the only option there was to create a new test. Now that I have a test, I can copy that test. Maybe I want to have 2 versions of it with the second version having some other items. I can delete it. I can inactivate the test. I think that's after you've administered a test. You can inactivate it to where students don't have access to it. I'm not sure exactly how that works out. I can share the test. That's another feature that I'm not totally familiar with the extent of that. I'm pretty sure that you can share those tests with other teachers at your school. I don't think you can share those tests across the district, but I'm not positive about that. I'm going to look more into that over the coming weeks and try to figure out what we can do district-wide as far as sharing tests that we create in EAGLE. Then notice here, since I already have created this 4-question test, I can edit the details, which that goes back to my title and all that we added earlier. Or I can edit instructions. Now, in the instructions, if you notice here, it says show instructions. There are some automatic defaulted instructions that come up that they've set up for you. And then, and by the way, these are even incorrect because this says multiple choice questions, and this test does not have multiple choice. It has constructive response. So I would want to change those probably. And under my actions, I can edit those instructions, and I can delete all of that if I want, or I can just come in and edit parts of it. Notice I've got some basic font editing tools there to work with if I want to. And then finally, I can edit the items. Now, that doesn't mean actually that I'm editing what an item itself looks like. What that means is I can change the order of the items. So I can click on one and drag it so that I can change the order. Or I can delete. So notice in addition, under the editing feature, instead of previewing, I can delete those items one at a time. Under actions, I can preview the test. So now instead of just previewing an individual item, I can preview the entire test, which in this case, the test, in quotes, is 4 questions. And sure enough, it's a constructive response as indicated. But notice this little drop down here, I can actually now toggle between the 4 items that are there. So if I wanted to have these available during my instruction, I would be able to just switch back and forth between the items as needed. And again, you still have the same options as the students would have on an actual test using EAGLE or even in our interim DRC platform, anything related to that. You might notice too, something different in this one is there are 2 other options that we didn't have on the other item that we previewed. There is the calculator, and in this one, they're simply giving a scientific calculator, but they're also giving the graphing tool. And you know, I'm disappointed. I thought this was already set up for Desmos, but it looks like it's still using the old graphing tool that they had on last year's test or the year before. So anyway, that's there. And hopefully they'll get Desmos in here soon, since we're already using it on everything else within DRC. All right, so what we've done so far there is we have looked in the item bank. We've looked at creating a test. One more time, the word test there is used loosely, just meaning any set of items that you're pulling together, whether you want to use it as a test or not, is your business. The last thing I want to look at here, really the last main thing, is actually assigning one of these tests. Because again, EAGLE is meant to be an online assessment platform. So just a quick review. We've got this item bank. We've looked at how to create tests within using the items from the item bank. We are understanding that we are not able to import items into EAGLE or edit the items that are there, as far as I know at this point. And I don't know if there's any plan to do that. You know, the state's pretty careful about which items we use and which items they approve. And for that reason, I don't think they're wanting us to do much editing here. That said, though, I think the items are pretty strong, and you should be able to find enough there in most cases to help you out with some extra resources that you may not have had otherwise. But once we've created a test, this system is meant for you to be able to administer those tests digitally. So I would go to student testing. In the old days, when EAGLE was first started, they actually had your student rosters, your class rosters set up. Now, obviously with the State Department, they weren't uploading every night. They were uploading about once a month. So sometimes your rosters wouldn't be completely up to date, but they actually even had an option there for you to add students. Now, the rosters are not set up for you. So you'll notice here, I have no test sessions available, but it's mainly because I don't have any groups available. Now, I set up a test group the other day for when I was doing the middle school session on EAGLE. So I have one here already, but probably if you have not used EAGLE, you don't have any there. So let's look at how to set up a student group, basically your class. So under Actions, I have the option to set up a new test session or a new student group. Well, to set up a new test session, you would first need student groups, and you would also need a test to assign. So let's set up a student group first. And notice some options here. Remember our initial discussion that you may not see all these in your teacher login. You will probably go straight to a school, to your school. Mine takes me to Caddo and it has all our schools. I'll just pick BTW since that's the first high school I see. And then I need to name this. I might want to name it Algebra 1 First Period, or however you want to name your classes. I can be more descriptive if I'd like, but then I have to assign a grade level, so I'll just say 9th grade since it's Algebra 1, even though I may have some 10th graders in there. Or if I'm an 8th grade algebra teacher, I could still label it either way. I'm going to save that basic information, and now I have the opportunity to add students. Now, because I picked Booker T. Washington, and Ms. Gerald, you might could help us out with this. Can you tell us, Ms. Gerald, I'm going to unmute you. Can you tell us if you recognize any of these student names?
Yes, I do.
Okay, good. That's what I needed to know. So when you go into your school then, you should be able to find all the kids who are listed as 9th graders.
Yes.
And then what you're able to do there, that makes it a little easier in setting up your classes because now I can just check on the students who are in my first period class. Now it's a little time consuming, I get that. But once you've done it for the year, you shouldn't have to make changes too often. Hopefully just minor changes every once in a while as students transfer in and out from time to time. So I would have that class set up, and I'm actually not going to do this because I don't want to mess up any data. But that's how that works. So notice I've got this class set up, but it tells me there are no students there and there are no test sessions assigned. But once I have my classes set up and I've created a test, then I could come in and create a test session, create a new test session. And nothing magical here. Again, you would pick your school. You could name the test whatever you want. And then I can set my testing window. And I can save it. Once I've saved that, I would actually pick the test that I wanted to assign to that class. And that's a big one. It's got 95 questions on it. And I would click Next. And notice I do have the test assigned, but it's reminding me I don't have any students in the class to take the test. So that's that. But it's pretty standard testing software platform there. Not too complicated, although I know we're kind of rushing through this. So if you sit down and want to work on this the next day or two, or any time between now and the end of the school year, and you want a little help walking through it, please call me up and I'll either come by and see you, or we can talk through it over the phone. We could even set up an individual Zoom conference and be able to look at each other's computer screens. So that's the test sessions. Any questions up to this point? Because we're almost done with the info. Item bank, setting up tests from the item bank, and then assigning tests, setting up student groups and assigning tests to those student groups or individual students. Okay, there is editor scoring. It's on page 129 in the user guide. There are the instructions there for educator scoring. So just like with interims and diagnostics and anything you do online, you know that some items are scored automatically by the computer, others have to be hand scored. And page 129 of the user guide walks you through that. Not going to take time for that today. Once you've scored tests and everything is taken and graded, then there are some reports here that you can pull up. And again, I'm not sure you're going to see all these reports. I don't think you can pull up a district performance report, but you should be able to pull up a school performance report for your school. or at least for all of your classes, and make comparisons there, look at student scores. I used this when I was in the classroom as actual giving unit tests. And I had students that were able to go in and look at their results right away, except for any hand-graded items. And they were able to make test corrections. I always require my students to make test corrections, and we talked through that process. So I think it's a good system. It may not be ideal. There may be some shortfalls. You may not always be able to find the items that you want for a particular test or quiz or homework assignment or whatever it is. But I would encourage you to give it a shot and see if you can find it useful. I think at the very least, we should be able to use this as a resource for finding items such as I mentioned at the beginning, bell ringers, exit tickets, problem sets in the middle of class, whatever it might be. Notice the last thing I didn't say on here is there is a help tab. The only thing the help tab does is take you to an email and a phone number. It's not an interactive help site. But I have had pretty good luck. I've called this number twice and gotten someone to talk to pretty quickly. I've sent one email, but it's been about 3 years ago, and I got a response the same day. I think I emailed in the morning, got a response pretty soon after lunchtime. So you should be able to get pretty good responses from that if you need that, but also feel free to call me. We also have a couple of people here at Central Office who are somewhat familiar with the platform and a little deeper mindset than me as far as things like if I can't find a student, I need to add a student, things like that. Then there's someone here who can help with that. But I would say try the help desk first and hope that someone answers. If not, call me or call Central Office and ask for IT, and someone there should be able to help. So we'll do everything we can to support you in making this happen and being able to use it. All right, at this point, that's the information, and I don't like to just throw things out at you like that, but I felt like that was the best way to do it here. Just give you an overview, and then I'd like to open up the floor and see if anybody has any questions, but also if you have used EAGLE recently and have some suggestions or maybe some concerns based on your own experiences, I'd love to hear that. Hey, Terry.
Are those tests all on computer, or can you print them out?
Oh, thank you very much. That is something I meant to address. So let's go back and look at tests. Great question. And I'm actually going to point out two things here. First of all, to answer Terry's question, if I go to this test that I created, notice it's just called 6EEA02 because those are all the items under that standard. And I open my test and go to Actions. Not only can I preview the test, but I skipped this earlier, I can create a PDF. And I'm going to show you, there are two check boxes here. If I leave those unchecked, then first of all, I'm not going to be getting an answer key. I'm going to be getting a student page. But then notice this other one says one item per page. That's exactly what it means. So if I leave that unchecked, then what I'm going to get is a PDF version of these items that is fairly condensed and more efficient. And here's what it would look like. Notice these instructions are the default instructions, so you might have wanted to edit those instructions, but then I scroll down and there are those items from that particular standard that I put together on that test. It looks like these are all multiple choice. Well, there's a short answer on there. So see, you have to think about some formatting things. If you were going to print one of these tests, you would need to check it out first and make sure that it's you know, in good format, because this question here, number 11, I'm thinking I would have to get kids to do it on a separate sheet of paper or something, give them some space. But yes, these can be printed out. And then just to go back and show you the answer key, when I click on Show Answer Key, then you're going to get the same looking item on the instructions, but you notice the answers are going to be shaded there. So you'd want to print one of those for yourself or just save it to your computer. If I go down here to number 11, it's going to show me the correct answer is 5. If you're like me, you're going to want to see some work on that and not just see an answer. So you want to, again, deal with that formatting issue. And you can print them one per page. But again, if you've got more than a few problems, that's going to take up a lot of paper. Unless it's just something you want for yourself. If you're one of those teachers who uses an Elmo, a document camera, then printing one per page might be a good resource for you. Great question. Thanks for asking that, Terry. Something I definitely meant to cover and skipped. Oh, the other thing I was going to show you along that same line, this is actually not along the same line, but using the same page that I was in. So going back to the website, I'm coming into my tests. Notice that that's the test we pulled up. Notice that this one test here has this little different icon, and that has to do with sharing. So this is one that I had actually shared out with some middle school teachers. If I go to that test, I just want to make a point here that you probably could have figured out on your own, but just to provide some clarity. If I pull up that test, notice it has 4 items. I don't have the ability to edit that test. And if you think about it, it probably makes sense. Because it's a shared test, the assumption is that someone may have administered that test already, and so they're not going to allow me to edit it. So what I would need to do if I want to take that same test and edit it is I would need to make a copy of it. So you see, if you work with Google Docs a lot, and this is not anything out of the ordinary for you. Notice I could also inactivate that test, and I don't know if that keeps shared users from giving it. I'm not positive about that, but I'm thinking it might. Of course, once you've shared a test with someone, they could make a copy of that test, and then it would become their own, able to edit. So I wanted to share that feature in there as well, that once you've shared a test, you're going to be limited on being able to edit that. Okay, great question. Any others? Any suggestions or other questions? Okay, well, I'll stay on the line a little bit longer. Otherwise, we are done. I will just a quick review, just a basic overview. We went to the home page. We got here through the eDirect/DRC site. If you need that login information, please contact me or one of your assistant principals there at your school. They should be able to get that, but I should be able to as well. We looked at the item bank and how you can find the items here through the search engine. I emphasize that you probably want to use this advanced filter, and just as soon as you get it as narrow as you want, hit search, and we'll pull up the related items. Keep in mind that there are a few standards that have no items. Hopefully that'll change over time, hopefully soon. Once you have kind of been able to explore the item bank, you might want to create a test, remembering that the word test is used loosely there. It might just be something you use for an introductory activity to your lesson, part of your lesson instruction, exit ticket, homework assignment, quiz, whatever you want to call it. But the word here is test, and it's used to imply that you're going to be putting together something that involves probably more than one item. And then that test, as Terry helped us out, we noticed that those tests can be printed. We can pull this up quickly. They can be printed, create a PDF, or they can be administered online. And when you click preview that test, you would see what it would look like to your students online. And then speaking of online testing, what we looked at was the student testing platform here, where I would first need to create my student groups. Then if I have tests created already, then I can assign those tests to those students and go back and look at reports once those tests have been completed and anything that need to be hand scored has been done. So there is Eagle in a nutshell. If you haven't been using it and haven't heard of it or haven't seen it, I hope that that's helpful for you and gives you, get your wheels turning on a new resource that is state approved. If you have been using it, again, I'd love to hear any input you have. If not today, as you move forward, send me an email or give me a call and let me know what you think, any suggestions you have. All right, thanks so much. Hope you guys have a great evening and a great rest of the week, and hope you have some great plans laid out for Thanksgiving and enjoy some time for yourself. You well deserve it. And again, I'll stay on here for a little bit longer. Take care.